God, is that you? Finance Committee meeting for July 19th, 2021 will come to order. I recognize a quorum. Councilor Mendez is traveling out of state. Councilor Cardozo has a scheduled conflict. Welcome, everyone. Would the clerk please call the first agenda item?
Ordered that the common necessity and convenience of the inhabitants of the city of Brockton require the laying out of Chestnut Drive Extension, extending from the southerly terminus of the 2010 layout of the Chestnut Drive southerly, and for that purpose, it is necessary to take an easement for highway purposes in layout as a public street or of said city of Brockton. Invited, Patrick Hill, interim DPW Commissioner.
Are there any residents from Chestnut Drive here? Any residents? Just for information purposes, in order to accept a street and make it a public way, we do send out notices to all of the residents in that area so that anyone who is either for or against it can come in. So even though this looks formal, this is an opportunity for you or anyone else to either speak in favor of accepting the street or not in favor of accepting the street. So it's just that simple. So, Mr. Hill?
Counselor? Wait, the DPW doesn't have any objections to this.
I've got to try to fix this echo. I don't know if it's...
That echo. It's not you, Pat.
It's not me.
All right, well, I declare the hearing open. Is there anyone here in favor? Anyone here in favor of this agenda item, layout Chestnut Drive extension? If so, please step forward and give your name to the clerk. Is there anyone here in favor? I declare that part of the hearing closed. Is there anyone here in opposition? Anyone here in opposition to accepting Chestnut Drive extension? Anyone here in opposition? I declare that part of the hearing closed. Councilors, the question comes on accepting. Any comment?
Council Chairman? Council
Yes,
Chairman.
Councilor Ianieri.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, Chestnut Drive Extension is located in Ward 3, and the people had inquired about the rest of that street being made a public way because we had made another part of it a private way some years ago because of some street repair that had to be done there. So I don't see anybody here that is against or opposed, and I wouldn't think that they would be. But at this time, I'd like to make a motion that we move forward with this this order before us this evening.
Second.
This is a motion made and seconded. Recommend favorably. All in favor? All opposed? It is unanimous. Madam Clerk, item number 2.
Ordered that the common necessity and convenience of the inhabitants of the city of Brockton require the laying out and acceptance of Gloucester Street, extending from Pinehurst Avenue easterly to Anita Road, a distance of 1,051.42 feet, more or less. And for that purpose, it is necessary to take an easement for highway purposes and layout as a public street or way of said city of Brockton. Invited, Patrick Hill, interim DPW Commissioner.
All right, for anyone who may be here for Gloucester Street, same parameters. This is a hearing so that you can speak either in favor or in opposition. Mr. Hill, the DPW position?
We have no objections to this.
All right. So I declare the hearing open. Is there anyone here that would like to speak in favor?
Could I ask what
Sure,
impact,
come on up, ma'am, because you're...
what impact does, go all the way up?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
you want me to,
I'm sorry, Counselor?
with Council Thompson's permission, would you be all right if I talked about the public-private way?
Sure, I'd like to hear what the question is first,
Sorry
but
about that, yeah.
I'm sure I could answer.
Just point of information, Mr. Chairman, the resident should state their name and address.
Yes.
My name is Nancy Suter. I live at 108 Gloucester Street. Our question is, how does this affect the residents of Gloucester Street? Like, what does it actually do?
Mr. Chair? I'd
Go
be
ahead,
happy to
Dick.
answer.
Go ahead, Counselor.
Good evening, ma'am. I'm Jeff Thompson. I'm the Ward 5 City Councilor, so thank you for appearing tonight and asking that question. So what happens here is when Gloucester Street was initially built, it was built as a private way. A private way is, it's taken care of like any other street in Brockton. Potholes would be fixed, the street would be plowed, the trash is picked up, and if there's an issue with sewer or water, they'd be repaired. But what doesn't happen with a private way, is that it is not eligible for repaving, a complete repair of the road. One of the things that I've been trying to do as Ward 5 City Councilor is identify the private ways in the ward and go through this process to have them accepted as public ways. Now, as you know, residents of Ward 5, we pay the same taxes as every other resident in the city, but it seems like a lot of our streets are ineligible for a full repaving due to them being private ways. So I've been working through Ward 5 to try to have them accepted. Your question is what's going to be the difference?
Right.
There's going to be no difference. This is only kind of a administrative function that we have to, every street in Brockton as a public way has to have an engineering survey filed in our engineering department. Private ways are not engineerily surveyed and in the engineering department. So one of the processes was, and I don't know if you remember the stakes that were in the road for a period of time. So we have to go through an engineering process for these private ways to be accepted as public way. But practically speaking, there will be no difference. You will not see a raise in your taxes. You will notice no difference other than, hopefully, sometime in the near future, Pinehurst will be completely repaved.
Okay. And so just a different question. So once it becomes a street, then who do you talk to about maybe limiting it from being a two-way street?
You can start with me, ma'am. I'd be more than happy to meet with you after this, and I can give you my contact information, and I'd be more than happy to discuss that issue. I don't know if it's feasible to make Pinehurst a one-way, Gloucester a one-way, since it does run into Pinehurst, but I'd be more than willing to discuss that issue with you.
So the problem is with the Baker School there. People use it as a pass-through after school at way more than 30 miles an hour. And there are children in the neighborhood walking on the street, and these people don't care that there are kids walking, and so it's dangerous. We oftentimes will, try and wave people to get them to kind of slow down because the kids are walking on the street.
So I'd be more than happy to discuss with you different traffic or speeding mitigation techniques that we could possibly use on Gloucester to limit the speeding. Unfortunately, that's an issue that we deal with throughout the city, but I'd be more than willing to discuss that with you after this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Anyone else here in favor? Anyone else here in favor of accepting Gloucester Street? If not, I declare that part of the hearing closed. Anyone here in opposition? Anyone here in opposition to the order? If not, I declare that part of the hearing closed. Councilors, the question comes on recommending favorably. All those in favor? All those opposed?
The motion needs to be made, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me?
The motion needs to be made, Mr. Chairman.
You are correct.
So,
Thank
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to recommend favorably to the full city council the acceptance of Gloucester Street.
Now a motion is properly made and seconded. All in favor? All opposed? It is a vote. Thank you, Councilor Lally. Number 3.
Appointment of Michael Anthony Branch, 25 Montello Street, Extension, Brockton, Mass. 02301, as a constable in the city of Brockton for a term of 3 years. Invited Anthony Michael Branch.
Good evening, Mr. Branch.
Good evening, distinguished members of the council. Looks like we have an echo problem here. Oh, sorry about that.
Make a motion for favor recommendation.
Second.
Motion has been made and properly seconded to recommend favorably. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Azak?
Yes.
Ianary?
Yes.
Farwell?
No.
Lally?
Yes.
Monahan?
Yes.
Nicastro?
No.
Rodriguez?
Yes.
Thompson?
Yes.
6 yeas and 2 nays.
Recommended favorably, Mr. Branch. This will come up next Monday evening, the 26th, which is the formal vote by the council. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. God bless the council.
Madam Clerk, item number 4.
Ordered. In accordance with the general laws of Massachusetts, Chapter 44, recommending that the City Council authorize the acceptance and expenditure of an additional grant award in the amount of $25,000 from the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security, fiscal 2021, Senator Charles E. Shannon Jr. Community Safety Initiative Grant to the City of Brockton Police Department, fiscal year 2021, Senator Charles E. Shannon Jr. Community Safety Initiative Grant Fund. Invited Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer, Emmanuel Gomes, Chief of Police, Michelle St. James, Grant Coordinator, Brockton Police Department.
Good evening, all. Ms. St. James, do you want to kick this off?
Good evening, councilors. Mr. Chair. This money was, this $25,000 was to help partners who spend a tremendous extra money because of COVID. So it's going to the Boys and Girls Club to defray the cost of transportation for 30 kids to go to summer camp, and also to Brockton Christian Mentoring Initiative, who are doing an in-person Love to Learn Summer Academy this summer for 25 youth. That's to help bridge the gap, because there's been quite a learning gap because of kids doing remote learning for the last year plus. So, any questions?
Motion to recommend favorably back to
Second.
the full city council.
Motion been made and properly seconded to recommend favorably. Any questions or discussion? If not, all in favor? All opposed? It is a vote.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Madam Clerk, item number 5.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
That was Councilor Monahan.
Yes, Council Monahan.
Bless you, my son. Last week, we were having not last week, last time we were here, with echo. I thought it was supposed to be tweaked. It's still annoying. It's still happening. Who's working on this?
The Information Technology Department is working on that issue, as well as Assistant Clerk Cruz. In addition, as you may remember, we had internet difficulties at the last meeting, and Mr. Santos has identified the problem. What we need to do is we need to broadcast directly from here to BCA and Comcast, and then to YouTube. But right now, we're using the internet to get to BCA and Comcast. So there is the mayor has graciously said, please proceed with that project. So this echo that we're experiencing, as well as the internet trouble, should be cleared up very shortly.
Okay. Thanks. I didn't know what was going on. All right, thank you.
Item number 5.
Ordered that the City of Brockton appropriate the amounts of $19,100,000 for the purpose of paying costs, designing and constructing water system improvements, but not limited to water main replacements in the North Montello Street Loop, North Main Street and Martland Avenue, repairs and paving incidental to the making such improvements, and the pavement of all costs incidental or related thereto. To meet this appropriation, the city treasurer, with the approval of the mayor, is authorized to borrow said amount under General Law, Chapter 44, Section 8, 4, or pursuant to any other enabling authority, and to issue bonds or notes of the city therefore. Any premium received upon the sale of any bonds or notes approved by this vote, less any such premium applied to the payment of the cost of issuance of such bonds or notes, may be applied to the payment of costs approved by this vote in accordance with General Law, Chapter 44, Section 20, thereby reducing the amount authorized to be borrowed to pay such costs by a like amount. Further ordered that the city treasurer is authorized to file an application with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Municipal Finance Oversight Board to qualify under General Law, Chapter 44A, any and all bonds or notes of the city authorized by this vote, and to provide such information and execute such documents as the Municipal Finance Oversight Board of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts may require. Invited Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer, Patrick Hill, Interim Commissioner of DPW, Martin Brophy, Treasurer Collector.
Gentlemen, and Mr. Mayor, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, I know I'm not listed as an invited guest, but first of all, good evening, members of the committee. What's before you tonight is something that we've all talked about for years relative to infrastructure under the ground. We've seen a rash of water leaks. Larry Rowley, the recently retired DPW commissioner, is here. Pat Hill is here, the interim. A lot of these pipes are from the late 1800s to early 1900s. But I just want to let you know that if this vote goes forward, the cap is at $19 million. We expect, the city of Brockton does expect to reap the benefits of the federal infrastructure. We don't know what that bill is going to actually trickle down to the Commonwealth and then to the city of Brockton. But that, I just want to make it clear that if we get infrastructure money from the feds, we're going to be able to subsidize some of that amount relative to the infrastructure that's before you tonight. So if you did favorably recommend this and it was passed, the cap would be the $19 million. But again, if the feds come through, and Congressman Lynch has assured me and Senator Markey has assured me that we will benefit, we would be able to subsidize some of that amount. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Clarkson?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the council. This is a long-awaited investment in our infrastructure, as you all know. I think first and foremost, it's important, as I noted to you in my email last week, that the entirety of the cost of the payment of the principal and interest on this debt is payable through the water user fee that you instituted last year. So although we're investing a significant amount, as the mayor mentioned, up to $19 million, that will not have any pressure or cause this body to have any impact on water rates. And I know that's important to you as representatives of your constituents and of our taxpayers and water system users. So I'll repeat that just for clarity's sake. The reason why you instituted that user fee and what we told you when we suggested it is that it would enable investment in our city's infrastructure. So this is the direct result of that action, and we're able to invest up to $19 million in our subterranean infrastructure because you took that action a year ago. We project this year that the income just on the water side of the enterprise fund from that user fee will be approximately $1.4 million. The principal and interest at its most expensive point, Treasurer Marty Brophy, with the assistance of the folks from Hilltop Securities, has provided an amortization schedule. And even in the first year, given current interest rates of that loan payback, we expect that the principal and interest will be less than the amount we're collecting. And again, that's just in water. There will be we expect sewer work as well, so we have revenue coming in on the sewer side that can take on more debt without impacting rates. So this is a very positive, a very fiscally responsible, and a very fiscally conservative action and program that we have before you tonight. Both, as the mayor mentioned, our previous DPW commissioner and our interim commissioner are here, and they can talk about the specifics of the program. The details were provided to you. It is important to note that these are proposed at this time. As the mayor noted, we do anticipate significant additional work here in the city in the next few years because of the money coming into the city from the American Rescue Plan Act and presumably additional infrastructure work from the infrastructure bill that's pending before Congress. So we expect our streets to be very busy over the next few years with lots of work, but we consider that work to be progress. And so that's all good news that we bring to you tonight. So I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, Larry and Pat Hill are here to answer any specifics on the operational issues.
Councilor Thompson and then Councilor Monahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, Mr. Clarkson. As you said, this is a long-awaited borrowing to address our water infrastructure in the city. I'm really happy. Thank you for taking the time, sitting down with me to discuss this, both you, Mr. Mayor, and Larry, Mr. Rowley, Mr. Hill. You guys been really great allowing me to chew your ear on this issue and then finally get some action on it. So it is much, much appreciated. I had one question. So in the order, it says, in the order, I guess there's, and I don't see the, in addition to the original order, I guess there's an additional order saying that to qualify under GL Chapter 40A and any bonds or notes and stuff like that. So I know when we originally talked about this, we said that potentially this project, well, the Phase 1 project, could qualify under SRF and be able to seek a different way of funding this project, kind of like we did Phase 1 and Phase 2 of our transfer lines. So does this order allow us to as well seek to have this infrastructure bill be be allowed to be borrowed under SRF? Is that what the additional order allows for?
Yes, the simple answer is yes, and I can give you a couple reasons behind that. One is we have the rare privilege of having our bond counsel, Rick Manley, here, and he is shaking his head yes, so that's the first reason why I answer yes. But moreover, during our discussions about the language for this loan order, we talked about the fact that the projects may qualify for, as you say, SRF, but benefit for the public. I'll identify that as the state revolving fund, where we can get additional low-interest loans and principal forgiveness, and we've had some projects qualify for that. So there's language that Rick actually crafted specifically in here that allows us the flexibility that should some or all of this qualify for a different funding source, this allows us to replace these projects with additional water main projects. And so what you're being asked to do tonight is to approve up to $19.1 million for water infrastructure work. That our plan is to use these projects, but should we get alternative funding through those or some of the sources that the mayor mentioned, then additional projects can be conducted under the umbrella of this loan order. So we do anticipate over the next several years, probably, likely, tens of millions of dollars more in infrastructure investment in the city because of the varied nature of the funding sources. It's a challenge we rarely, if ever, have had before, but it's a good one to have.
I agree, and the residents of Ward 5 are glad to hear the plan for additional infrastructure projects. So hopefully, as you said, that this project can be accepted under the SRF and free up those funds not used on these on Phase 1 for other additional projects in the future. So I'm just hoping that that's the case. I appreciate your time on that, Mr. Clarkson. And if Commissioner Hill does come forward, I'd like to have an opportunity to ask him a couple questions as well, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Councilor Monahan.
Yes, not really a question. I know this is a long time coming. We've been talking about this infrastructure for years and years and years, ever since I've been on the council. And we have the roads, so many roads that need to be done. This infrastructure in the city really is in tough shape. We were only given so much money each year to do the roads we do, but, I mean, like I said before, I'm working every day doing water leaks, doing dig saves for them every single day. And you see it just never ends. So it's about time. We're going to save some money with these new pipes anyway because we're not going to lose all the water through leaks and what have you. So it's going to be really, as the mayor would say, a win-win. But anyway, were you going to ask another question? Because I was just going to make a recommendation for favorable recommendation.
Well, no, my point was that if Commissioner Hill wanted to talk about any of the actual phases, projects itself, then I would just ask for the opportunity to speak with him about that. But I knew if you had a question for
No, I had no questions.
Mr.
If
Clarkson,
anybody else does,
please go right ahead.
You can make the recommendation once you have your questions.
Okay. I didn't know if anybody else had questions for Mr. Clarkson. I would.
Oh, do you? Okay, okay.
I don't have any questions, but I'm happy to see that this is starting on Ward 7, so thank you. Thank you.
All right. Anything else for Mr. Clarkson? We can go on to the next speaker. Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After dying here from a cough, I don't know where this is coming from. But, Mr. Clarkson, this basically is a project for the north side of the city. That's going to cost around $19 million. It's basically just the north corridor of the city. And we've got problems throughout the city, so we're looking at possibly 4 times 19?
So for the specifics on the project, I will certainly yield to both Mr. Hill and Mr. Rowley, but I would note that this is Phase 1, and we do anticipate multiple phases over multiple years, and so it's a scope of infrastructure investment, the likes of which I would suggest the city has not seen because of the various funding sources we have available between our own bonding and the federal assistance that's coming and county money. So we do anticipate this to be the first of many phases where there'll be investments throughout the city. But Pat, you want to add to that? Yep.
I actually have a question for Mr. Hill as well, too. Well, go ahead, Patrick.
So the Phase 1 proposal in front of you was identified through a water model that we did throughout the entire distribution system. The pipe is cast iron. It's from the 1930s in some sections, it's from the 1890s in other sections, and it's unlined. So we've seen fire flow deficiencies there, we've seen water quality issues there, and all in all, we're trying to loop an area of the city to increase the water quality throughout the north side.
I know Larry had brought this up a while ago when he was in front of us talking about this. We have several miles of piping that needs to be done throughout the city. Several miles.
Yeah, we have a lot more than several miles of pipe that needs to be replaced.
When I say several, I'm talking about in the neighborhood of 100 miles of roads that pipes that need to be done.
Probably 75% of the system needs to be replaced.
Okay. So, for the folks that are watching us at home and the folks in here in the audience, or us sitting up here, what are you looking at in the total number as far as the amount of money that it's going to require to get the city to a level where we can say our water system is somewhat upgraded?
I mean, Councilor, if I had to guess, we'd be in the hundreds of millions of dollars to get the substantial size pipes replaced. That's just for the bigger size water mains, maybe 16-inch and above. Okay. Throughout the city, it would be a lot more than that.
And would you say that these are somewhat the worst of the worst that we actually have in the community, or there are worse ones out there?
That Phase 1 project is something that we've identified as the worst of the worst due to flow restrictions, water age, and pressures.
Because I recall sitting here listening to some folks from Ward 6, my ward as well. You know, I'm an at-large council. I mean, these guys take credit for being ward councilors in the sense they forget that we at large basically have the entire city. Council Alley.
I'm willing to share if you pave my roads, Councilor.
We actually have had some issues up in that corner of the city as well, where the piping are, where you have got 6-inch pipes down to an inch or so of float. When will those individuals see some sort of an upgrade towards a better system that they actually have?
I mean, outside of the pipes that have been identified in the package that you have in front of you, I would certainly think that we would look at the age of the pipe as a priority. We see a lot of pipes in the older section of the city between Main and Warren Ave, Main and Montello, that we struggle to repair, that we have to cut out 12-foot sections as opposed to 2-foot sections to make repairs because the pipe is so brittle. I think there's a lot of those pipes in the city, but the package you have in front of you are the ones that we've identified for now.
And also, when you're doing these pipes, you're actually doing the roads as well.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so can I just make a recommendation, if I can? I mean, I know we haven't gotten to the design phases of these things yet, or have we done that?
I'm sorry?
Have we gone through the design phases of the roads and all that other stuff?
No.
No. Can we kind of avoid planting trees all over the place? Because I brought this up before. We do a lousy job taking care of trees around roadways. So if we can kind of minimize it, it would actually make the lives and the eyes a lot easier to deal with in the community. I know some folks have said I'm anti-trees. That's not true. Trees, well taken care of trees can go anywhere, but when we're not taking care of them, they're just kind of overgrowing and creating all kinds of hazards to drivers and stuff. Let's minimize that as we go along and make sure that we put them in places that they belong.
Well, I think when they plant trees, Counselor, now too, they're a little bit more friendly to the roadways as they were years ago, so.
Yeah, because you see some of these things, they're just growing wildly and stuff, so I hope that, you know, we can kind of keep that in mind as we go forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Before I go back to Counselor Thompson, Counselor Azak?
Yes, so just some point of information towards my colleague, Councilor Rodriguez. I do get a lot of complaints, Councilor, from Ward 7 of discoloration of water and water flow. We're not as maybe, because it's a main road and a lot of the area there, we do get a lot of calls. I know the water department does as well. So that's why I mentioned earlier, thank you for starting in Ward 7. I hope, you know, Ward 6 is right next to us, so we'll share the wealth. This is just the beginning of this, you know, fixing the infrastructure in the city. So thank you again. Thank you, previous Commissioner Rowley.
Counselor Lally?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ward 6 is watching how many roads Ward 7 gets done. There's a lot of bad pipe underneath all throughout the city. There are a lot of streets that, you know, I've gone back and forth with you and now retired Commissioner Rowley about, you know, paving that simply just couldn't get done because the pipes underneath were so bad that it would be irresponsible to repave the road before replacing the pipes as well, because we will have to be back to dig up those pipes. So any little bit helps, and this is a little more than a little bit. So I am absolutely very excited to see this, and I have all faith that it'll start coming over to the ward. I appreciate Councilor Rodriguez's offer to help get more roads in the ward paved as well. We got 208 of them. Together, you and I can knock out a couple. One quick question, not entirely related, but we've got a lot of bonding going on. This might be best for the mayor or the CFO, but we got a lot of bonding going on, and when it comes to water infrastructure, one of the biggest things holding the budget back is the giant chunk of money we got to give to Aquaria every year. Are we any closer to any kind of arrangement with Aquaria? Is that still on the table? And if so, when we're done bonding, are we going to have any wiggle room if Aquaria gives us a real good deal?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything's on the table, Counselor. I want to commend Counselor at Large, former Mayor Moses Rodriguez. I mean, he sat at the table. I've been a lawyer for a long time, and when you negotiate in good faith, you would expect that the next person coming in would have those same terms. However, when I took office, they jacked the price up. Moses had got it to a fairly reasonable amount, and then when I came in, they jacked it up. That's not good faith. But I will tell you that, you know, when we talk about bonding, and again, a lot of our professional expertise are here tonight, including the former CFO as well. We take it very, very serious because it could have an impact on our rating, right? And we don't want to have our bonding rating impacted in a negative way in any way. So I will tell you that, you know, I'll talk to anybody. I think the ball is in their court. I'm a sports guy. I think the ball's in their court to get back to us. Haven't heard from them, but again, our focus has been on the 435 loss of lives in Brockton because of COVID. However, with that being said, I do suspect we'll be getting an influx of money, which kind of ties into what Counselor was saying. Over the years, we've only done a Band-Aid approach. Right, that's what we've done. That's all we've been able to do. But thanks to the council, now we have a revenue source that's going to be able to subsidize and also help us with the bonding. Today was a historic day in the United States of America. It was one of the lowest interest rates ever. So we want to consider borrowing now that's going to be beneficial in the future. But I will tell you, we're going to be doing a top-to-bottom analysis from Ward 1 all the way to Ward 7. I mean, you can talk about the issues in the village or in your council, in your area or in your area. Ward 4 has a lot of issues, you know. Ward 2, where I grew up, you know, Ward 1, Ward 7, they all have their own issues. And, you know, what Moses said is true. Council at Large serve the whole city. So I can just tell you that I want to continue to work with you. You know, we're better working together in collaboration. But again, I really have to rely on the experts that are here, and also the fact that Mr. Rowley isn't gone. His institutional knowledge is valuable. He is ready, willing, and able to work on a limited basis as a consultant. The key word is limited. But again, between him and all the other people, we're going to do some really good things in the next few years here in the city of Brockton.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Mayor.
you, Counselor.
No, this is good, absolutely. Aquaria is something that I think eventually we're gonna have our backs up against the wall on. But absolutely, the more things we can pave, everything we can do, we got to do it. So I am very optimistic about that. You know, the more things that get done, the more pipes replaced. Rising tide lifts all boats. So I want as much of it in the ward as I can, but everywhere that gets covered is one step further to getting more roads up by me covered. And rising tide lifts all boats is a quote from President Kennedy, which I think is very on the nose, because most of my roads have not been touched since President Kennedy. But I appreciate you striking while the iron's hot.
I concur with that, and as Teddy Roosevelt said, do what you can with what you have where you are. And I will tell you, and I know we're a little bit off now, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, but when Aquaria asked to meet with me and Troy and Larry Rowley down at the site, they called the meeting, we drove down there, they showed up an hour and a half late. We asked them why. We thought maybe because they fly in from Miami. No, they were having lunch. They lost track of time. It's not really the best thing to try to negotiate in good faith over. But you know what? As my grandmother said, let bygones be bygones, and that's what we'll do. So we'll come back with an update on Aquaria in the near future.
Thank you, and I very much appreciate
Thank you.
the work being done on the roads. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Counselor, a very wise person, and I don't remember the name, said to me, to be efficient, try to stick to the agenda item. So if we could make sure we try to confine ourselves to the issue of whether we're going to bond $19.1 million for the purposes outlined in the order. And Councilor Nicastro, you're recognized.
Thank you. And this question is probably for Mr. Hill and Mr. Rowley. My Ward 4 constituents are smart. I expect I will be receiving phone calls tomorrow saying, well, why are we borrowing all that money to do work in other wards? What about Ward 4? So if you could just give me a brief understanding of how it was decided that we would start the project in this way. Why is Phase 1 in one place? And when will we be getting to Ward 4?
So this area, Counselor, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it or not, but we have testing stations throughout the distribution system. They're little green boxes. They test the water. This area has started to spike in what they call THMs. THMs are a byproduct of treatment. When the water does not flow properly, THMs start to form on the bottom of the pipe. Over time, THMs can be dangerous to your health. So this specific area, through those testing stations, was identified. We know we've had flow issues up there for years. And obviously, the priority is to have the clean, safe drinking water first. So that's why we chose that section.
Okay. And what phase is Ward 4 in, or Ward 4 pipes in? Do you have any idea?
Well, you got the initial packet, Counselor. I don't think we're 100% on the second phase of work with the selection of streets. Those are the streets that we chose to put in front of you for the packet. Phase 1 definitely needs to be done first. Phase 2 certainly. That's the topic for discussion.
So you'll be back in the future. We'll talk about it then.
Correct.
Thank you very much.
No
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, back to Councilor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, Mr. Hill. Thank you for being here. And thank you for taking the time, as always, sitting down with me and going over these plans. And I just, for the city's information and maybe my fellow city councilors, we sat down a couple weeks ago kind of going over Phase 1 and why, again, I kind of asked the same question. Why can't we just get to my streets? And your response was that through your water flow analysis or your water model, it said that this area in the North Montello, North Main Street area is a 6-inch pipe that was laid, as you said, in late 1800s, early 1900s. So this is part of our main water main going through this area. We go from a 24-inch pipe down to a 6-inch pipe in this area. And what that is causing is water to stagnate in these 6-inch pipes. When water is not flowing and it's not constantly moving, it creates that
THMs, yeah. The quality of the water breaks down, and when the sediment breaks down, it sits on the bottom of the pipe.
Correct.
Eventually, over time, that has an effect on the water.
Correct. So what we are required to do is to increase, and I believe the plan is to go from 6 inches to a 24-inch main to help with that water flow, which will eliminate the stagnation and all the issues that are associated with the water stagnation. This area is, as you said, the most important area in the city because of its dangerousness and because of our water stagnation and water flow issues in this area. Also, this is riding basically at the top of our water cycle, right, where the water is moving through Brockton. And so unless we take care of this issue, we're not able to then address some of those other mains that come off of this 24-inch main. So we have to address this first so that we can eventually get into the neighborhoods. So I think it's important that everybody understand that, we all want this work to be done in our ward, and me especially, but we have to address the issue of the highest priority first, and then from there work backwards to all of our wards. So again, I just want to thank you for your time, your effort into developing this plan. Hopefully, once this money, if approved by the City Council, we can begin the engineering work necessary to start moving forward with this plan. And so I'm excited about what's going to be happening in our neighborhoods over the next few years. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hill.
I make a motion to recommend favorably back to the full city council.
All right, there's been a motion made and seconded to recommend favorably. On the motion, Councilor Ianieri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not used to this new toy we have here. My question, and not that I'm going to be opposed to it, because I think it's something that's needed to be been done since, I don't know, I came here in 2004 and we started talking about it, and here we are, 2021, I think it is anyway, so it goes with my 18 years of sitting here and waiting for us to begin to do something in this regard, especially with our water problem. So at the same token, by listening to everybody and the start of it all, and it's we have to look at where we want to start, which is at the north section of the city, and then we start talking about, other wards and other streets within. You're still looking at another 10 years before you probably get to even, well, I'll say Ward 3, I'm not going to be the council there in the next, after 5 more months, but still, it could be 10 years before we even get down to that section of the city, and then some. So, I mean, I hope that we can find ways, not only just starting at the north end, but we also can move ourselves around in a quicker sense to what we can do throughout the city, and not have to, wait for 10, 12 years, because it has been quite a big issue, and will remain that issue in some of these other sections. So, that's just my concern. I think people at home probably going to have the same concern, that when they see the amount of money we're going to go out and we're going to bond on, and then at some point in time, in a few years, the water sewer rates are going to go up, and then they're going to start saying, well, they haven't done nothing at my end of the town, why are they working at the other end of town? Because they're not going to pay attention to that. They're going to pay attention to the bill you're going to send them, but they're not going to pay attention to understand why we're going in that direction that we're going. So, I mean, I think it's a great plan, and it as I say, not to repeat myself, but it should have been, something we've been working on a long, long time ago as well. So, good luck with it, and hopefully you can get something accomplished. But I think, we also got to come back, and I think I heard the comment even mention of, issue with even aquarium water and that, and we need to really revisit that whole issue, that we almost had a plan put in place, and things didn't happen with that. So we need to do some things in that regard too. So Councilor Rodriguez wasn't all that far off when he was the acting mayor to getting something done. Some councils here don't think that. As long as they're sitting here, they probably will never think it in the right direction. But I didn't have a problem with what we were looking at doing, because that needs to be tended to as well. So anyhow, I just wanted to put out my nickel in my insight. Thank you, and good luck, Pat.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, on the motion.
Motion.
Just for counselors' information and for those listening, things are happening now. Thomas Street, Thomas Circle is getting a complete water main replacement come next month. I believe Morse Ave is also in line for a complete water main replacement. So although this project, Phase 1, is one that is geared for the future, the city is working today on replacing our water mains. So again, thank you for that.
Yeah, and you know, the phase 2 transmission main job is going to be starting at the end of this month. We're meeting with a contractor for Thomas Street, Thomas Circle, Morse Ave, which will get all new water mains. The sewer mains have already been assessed, the drainage has already been looked at. They'll get new streets when they're done. The bids came in fairly low, so you know, we're hopeful that we may be able to pull another street out of that too. So.
Well, we appreciate that, and it's important that we all know that things are moving today, and we appreciate your department for helping out with that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Further discussion? If not, a motion has been made and properly seconded. All those in favor of recommending favorably? All those opposed? It is a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
Item number 6.
Ordered. Recommending that the City Council provide appropriation and borrowing authorization for $360,900,000 for the purpose of funding all or a portion of the unfunded pension liability of the retirement system of the City of Brockton. Invited Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer, Martin Brophy, Treasurer-Collector.
Councilors, there are some additional people who have been invited on this. Before we get into this agenda item, as you know, because of my years of service, I have a pension from the City of Brockton. I have written to the city solicitor asking an opinion as to whether I can deliberate or participate in this matter, because if we're providing funds to the retirement system, technically I have a direct financial interest, in my opinion. It may be perfectly all right for me to participate and vote, but until I get that decision back, I am going to recuse myself, and I'm going to ask Councilor Iannieri to chair the meeting from this point forward. No extra pay, Councilor Iannieri.
It's quiet tonight, I may not have to use it. Thank you, Council President. And we have the item, what number is it? Did you read it already?
6.
You already read it? Okay. And we have the former city council and the mayor in front of us. I haven't had a chance to say that, but welcome.
Good evening, Dean. Good evening.
Nice to see you, nice to be seen.
Good to see you. Yeah, absolutely. Again, I want to just thank you all. Some of us that are here tonight weren't technically invited guests on the agenda, but we do have really a plethora of skill sets here tonight. As I said, financial advisor, bond counsel, someone from the retirement board, Jay Condon. So we have been doing weekly Zooms, and I want to thank Troy Clarkson, the CFO, who coordinated this for over a half year now. For over 6 months, we've been doing weekly Zooms to talk about this. I'm here tonight just to tell you that we don't have to do this, right? I won't be the mayor when it comes to the point where the city of Brockton will be hampered, really hamstrung financially when the unpensioned pension liability is due, right, when the call comes in. Troy won't be the CFO. A lot of you won't be up here. But I think we have a duty right now as elected officials to look at how we can do something now to save the future of the city of Brockton. And it's much like when you refinance your house. You take out an additional loan, you pay off your existing loan, and you get a beneficial term in terms of interest. So what you're going to hear tonight is a lot of financial innuendos, a lot of facts. In 2005, Jay is going to tell you that the city of Brockton, and Dean, you would have been on the council then, they did something very similar, not to this extent. But we're talking about a huge number. This is a huge number. And so much like the last agenda item, my concern as mayor is to make sure that the integrity, the financial stability, and the rating is honored for the city of Brockton. So we've had conversations and Zooms with Moody's and with Standards and with the retirement board to make sure that we're on the right track. And everyone has assured us that indeed we are, because when that call comes in, it will be crippling for the city of Brockton. So again, I just want to thank you for your consideration on this. And I really feel that Mr. Clarkson has done a really spectacular job lining this up, and I want to thank each and every one of you for taking time to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know we have in front of us more or less a little agenda to follow in regards to this presentation, so I think that's what we're gonna do. I think that's what's been given us. So number 2 gives us an overview of the process and purpose, which we have Mr. Chief Financial Officer Troy Clarkson Mr. Clarkson, I should say, to present the items that he needs to present to us. I appreciate it. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd just like to start out very briefly and echo the sentiments of the mayor and thank, for those of a certain age, remember the A-Team TV show. We have collected the A-Team that sits here to my right. It's a group of consummate professionals, subject matter experts in the area of public finance, retirement, risk analysis, and the city of Brockton. And so we assembled this team of experts several months ago and spent many hours over many months. And we really gelled as a team, and we come to you before you tonight as a team that have worked together with one common purpose, and that is, as the mayor stated, to address that pension liability and ease the financial strain on the city as that annual payment to the Brockton Retirement Board increases. As we discussed when you approved this year's budget, the FY22 budget, the payment to the Brockton Retirement Board for this fiscal year is approximately $30 million. And over the next dozen years, because of the requirements to address that unfunded liability, that annual payment increases up to some $70 million per year. So when we went to work as a team, we wanted to see if there was a way that we could address that escalating liability and to provide some relief to the city and obviously, as a result of that, our taxpayers. And the answer was, as we began the risk analysis and looking at different scenarios and how this might work, the answer was an unqualified and absolute yes. So the simple story for you tonight is we have this accrued liability, and one, if not more of our experts will talk to you tonight about how we obtained that number of $360.9 million. But if we issue some debt and borrow that amount and then transfer that money to the retirement board, they will then invest that money. And our plan, which is a well thought out and detailed plan, is our projected interest rate for that money is about 2.5%. That's conservative, and so long as conditions remain as they are, that interest rate will likely be better than 2.5%. But throughout this process, we used numbers that were conservative so that we could stand here before you tonight and tell you that we ran several different scenarios, and these numbers we decided to go with because in and of themselves, using these numbers is a safety valve that allows us to have a program and estimates that we believe work. So you take that money and borrow it at 2.5%. The retirement board then invests it. And one of the things we did, and you'll hear about that more tonight, was took a look at the long-term performance of the retirement board funds and what a responsible and reasonable rate of return might be in estimating what kind of return that money will bring. And 6.75% is the estimate that we're using. You've seen that in the PowerPoint that I've provided to you a few times that showed the graphical representation of how that investment would work. So if we borrow at 2.5% and then earn interest at 6.75, that's pretty simple but very powerful math that says that this makes sense. If those interest rates on either of those fluctuate a little bit, there's still quite a bit of wiggle room in there that will allow us to have significant savings. One of the lessons we learned from the last time the city pursued pension obligation debt was that we should have some sort of safety net. No one could have predicted 2008 and 2009 when this city council, including the dean, okayed that in 2005. So one of the plans that we have is to take some of the excess money from this year's already appropriated money for retirement and put it in a special stabilization fund, so that we'll have up to $20 million set aside to guard against any market fluctuations and have our own safety net in place that we believe not only the rating agencies will look favorably upon, but the Commonwealth will as well. So we have already paid our portion of what's called the normal costs. So that's our ongoing annual costs to pay the pensions we're paying, and that money has already been provided. I do want to recognize Jeannie Martineau from the Brockton Retirement Board, who I see here in the gallery. The Retirement Board has been extraordinarily cooperative and has been real partners with us on this process, and we've kept them informed. And Marty Brophy and I went to a retirement board recently. As you know, your former CFO and my friend Jay Condon sits on the retirement board. So this, again, has been a real team effort where everybody's been involved. So that's just really a brief overview of the plan. We'll hear from some of the experts in a minute and about some of the work that we've done when we met weekly on Thursday to really make sure all of those scenarios were being considered. We have had preliminary discussions with Moody's and S&P, the traditional bond rating agencies, to talk to them about what we're thinking, just so that they're in the loop early, because as Councilor Lally mentioned, $360 million and $19 million and $98 million for a public safety complex, there's a lot of public debt being rolled around out there with the name Brockton on it. So we wanted to keep our rating agencies informed that although we're borrowing a lot of money, we're doing it in a thoughtful and responsible way. And they have, we're not to the point where we're presenting anything formal to them, but we're engaging them in discussions so that when this does go to market, they're not surprised. And we will have had significant conversations with them. So with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to do now is call upon Cinder McInerney, who's been the city's financial advisor for many, many years, and has that wealth and depth of experience specifically with Brockton. And she's been on this pension obligation bond working group since day one, and she'll talk to you a little bit about not only Brockton's, but she's aware of other municipalities that are pursuing similar programs, and talk to you about this program in comparison to some of the other communities.
Okay, thank you.
Cinder.
Good evening.
Hi.
How are you? Welcome here to City Hall. Welcome for being a part of this whole process as well. So I believe you're going to start about the market outlook and Brockton's position, so we'll move forward. And I would say we'll continue with all the others, and towards the end, we'll probably get into more in-depth and type of questions, but I think it'd be best if we hear from everybody, and then we can go from that route. Is that all right, councilors? Do you have I think that's the best way to do it than to, keep a long dissertation, but we'll do questions at the end. So, again, good evening. Welcome. You're on.
Good thing you said that. I could go on and on about pension obligation bonds, and I'll keep it quick. I was asked to put in perspective a little bit about the city's opportunity right now to issue pension obligation bonds to fund its unfunded pension liability. The current estimate of the city's unfunded pension liability is about $430 million. If you pay it off as you go, it's going to cost about $625 million. If you issue a pension obligation bond right now, the opportunity is to save somewhere between $150 and $175 million for the city over the next 15 years, as well as to restructure how you pay that unfunded pension liability with debt, but in a nice smoothing out way that doesn't create a situation like you have right now where pay-as-you-go, you go from $21 million in fiscal '22 to about $61 million 15 years from now, which is quite onerous to even think about. And that can all get fixed with something like a pension obligation bond if it's done right. The pension obligation bond has to be done on a taxable basis. Prior to 1985, it could be done tax exempt. It's done taxable, so you can go ahead and you're basically borrowing at a low rate, taxable rate, and investing to your heart's delight in the stock market, basically. There is a lot of risk associated with it, and the risk needs to be managed. The state ultimately will have to oversee what the city's plan is to do this, just like they did in 2005. In 2005, the city borrowed at a rate about $100 million at about a rate of 5.65. They assumed the city assumed at the time on its actuarial valuation that you'd earn about 8.5% return. Those bonds aren't completely paid off. Those, right now, just to put in comparison what the current opportunity is, you can probably borrow, like Troy said, at more like 2.5%, maybe even lower than that if you could borrow today, because we all saw what happened in the markets today. Treasury rates dropped to their all-time low. There is an urgency to get the city positioned to do this. Obviously, if you get yourself positioned and the rates have gone back up, the opportunity to save for the city over the next 15 years is reduced, and it could disappear. I don't want to sound like that's going to happen, but there are probably, you need special legislation for this. The city got the legislation back a long time ago, and that's what it used in 2005 when it issued pension obligation bonds. There are a lot of issuers in Massachusetts that are scrambling to get legislation so they could be in the same position. I only know of probably one handful of cities and towns in the Commonwealth that are trying as rapidly as they can to authorize pension obligation bonds like this loan order, and get in the market as soon as possible with this. There's a lot of work associated with making sure that the plan of finance for this transaction protects the city's interests and protects against the risk associated with this type of transaction. These are happening across the country. Each state has its own rules about how you can do this. In Massachusetts, there's a lot of oversight. The State Administration and Finance Office has to approve what the plan is here. And the city has developed a plan so far that would really protect its interests, and especially if the city can borrow at 2.5% and reinvest at 6 3/4. You know how that compares with the old 5.65 versus assuming 8.5% return. It's much more conservative. Then the risk is considerably minimized, and if we set aside reserves, we're hoping that would protect against all of the potential risk. So that's it in a nutshell, what the opportunity is. There is an urgency to it, though. I don't want it to sound like, the goal would be to get this done as soon after Labor Day as possible.
Very good.
Yep,
Thank you, Ms. McNeary. Appreciate it very much. We're going to move, Troy, do you want to introduce the...
Yes, I don't need to introduce our next team member because he is someone that is well known to all of you, but we're thrilled that Jay Condon offered his experience and his knowledge to our team and has been very busy working on some of those risk calculations that Cinder talked about. So he will address those for you tonight, and I'm very, very pleased to introduce a former CFO, Jay Condon.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Clarkson.
Good evening, Mr.
Good evening,
Chairman,
Mr. Condon.
councilors.
It's been a long time. Where you been?
I think so.
Huh?
I seem to recall your face.
But I say one thing, and I can remember when I was council president, and the late Mayor Bill Carpenter said that when Mr. Condon retires, I've got to keep him around somewhere. I think I'm going to put him on the retirement board. And I said, greatest appointment ever, Mayor. So
Thank you.
And I think we can all say that because we appreciate your style for all those 25 years. And you warned us of some things about what's before us and what was going to happen some years ago. So
Yeah, municipal finance is no fun.
the show's yours to explain, but I know you're doing a great job there as well as all others. So, and watching out for the city, and that's what's most important.
Well, thank you very much for those kind
And
words.
the retirees. That's very, very, very important.
Yeah, and you have a good board out there on Belmont Street, the retirement board. You've got a couple of firefighters who take their responsibilities very seriously. That's true throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The elected members to the retirement board are always firefighters. They know how to organize and they get themselves elected. But the auditor of the city is a member of the board by statute, and of course that's Anne Marie right now. There's a mayor's appointment, and that's who I am, and then the fifth member is elected by the other four. And then you have a capable staff out there led by an executive director, and we have attorneys that represent us as well as money managers. So it's a pretty good operation out there. I can speak highly for it. So what we're looking to do here with your approval is to borrow about $360 million. And what that number represents is basically the value in today's dollars of what the expected stream of payments to the current members of the system. That's people who are working and people who are retired and their beneficiary, what the stream of dollars would be paid over time, and bringing that back to a dollar value today, because dollars in the future are not worth as much as a dollar today, and subtracting from that the value of the assets that the pension system has today, and that net number is $360 million, and we're looking to borrow that. That number is based on a series of assumptions and calculations, and I think Linda Bornable is here, and she's the actuary for the system, so she can describe more completely what we mean by developing an actuarial report. It's published every couple of years. We're coming up on a new one. This is what it looks like, and her firm developed the last one. But basically, you're assuming that certain things are going to happen with the present members. They're going to die at a certain rate. They're going to have new people coming in and replacing them at a certain rate of pay. Some of them are going to be public safety officers who have different pension benefits from those of us who are normal workers and not in such danger, laborers and CFOs and clerks and city councilors who retire. And you're assuming that that money that you get in every year is invested in earning some rate of return. And when you make this borrowing, right now we're incented to do it because there's such a difference between what an expected rate of return on invested money, even under a conservative assumption, is, and the rate of money, borrowing money, taxable municipal bonds in today's market. We've assumed 2.5%. The mayor just a moment ago, and so did Cinda McNerney, talked about the rapid decline in Treasury rates today, so that they're at an all-time low. And so we think maybe we can even do better than that 2.5%. Maybe we won't do better, but we'll certainly be under 3%. And if you can earn 6 or 7% in the market, you will beat that, and over time pay out less money than you would have otherwise in funding that liability. I want to spend a second on how come that liability exists. It exists because when pension systems were established, and mainly after World War II and for a while thereafter, corporations and government entities were, and this system is a defined benefit system. It's not like a 401k. The beneficiaries in this system are due what they're due by law, and that calculation is based on what the law says and what they earned and when they earned it during their working years. But that's a benefit which is there under law and also by assumed contract. It's not like your 401k. You're making contributions, maybe your employer is matching it to some extent, but the risk of what that earns and doesn't earn is on you. But in a defined benefit system, that risk is on the pension system itself. So when pension systems were first formed, the pensions were paid out as they came due. For a long time, you didn't have an awful lot of pension cost. Nothing was put aside for the future cost. Mr. Clarkson said a few minutes ago, you've got a normal cost, and that's what's being earned this particular year for those pension members, active employees and retirees whose pensions are known because they're a calculation. So that number grew. When I first got here in 1990, the system was about 37% funded. When we sold the pension bond in 2005, I think we were at about 60% funded, and we're a little over 60% funded today. If we sell this bond, I think the lowest risk is on our being able to beat that investment by the investment, that interest rate, because there's such a spread between market performance right now and that interest rate. When we sold in 2005, we had about a 3% spread. We borrowed at about 5.5%. We were hoping to earn about 8.5%. And not too many years after that borrowing, the market collapse of 2008, 2009 occurred. And we lost about 30% of the investments, not just what the pension bond was worth, but the assets in the system at the time. So we had a hole that was dug pretty quickly in that time, and we had to climb out of it. But over time, since 2005, we've earned about 7%. So we've beaten the cost of money. So on the money basis, we're ahead of the game. On other assumptions within that calculation at the time, some things have worked against us, which would have happened whether we borrowed money or not. One of them had to do with the actuarial tables. How long are people going to live? Around the mid-2000s, maybe 2008 perhaps, the actuarial professionals of the country said, we're not recognizing the longevity of the people who are in the United States of America today. They're living longer, and so you've got to incorporate that extra longevity into your pension tables. That cost us money. In addition to that, your payroll growth is not just how much do you give to your people when they get contract settlements. Brockton's been pretty careful on that. But also, how are you hiring, which is different in future composition of workforce than what you had when you made your assumptions. And you may recall in the mid-2000s when Jim Harrington was mayor, there was a push to hire more police officers. We ended up hiring some firefighters as well. And then when Bill Carpenter became mayor, another push to hire more police officers, and again, more firefighters came behind that. Those people are expensive, you know, I'm not talking about the merits of them on the payroll, the work they do, but with respect to a pension assumption, they're expensive people because their salaries are high, they don't work as long, and they take a pension for many, many more years. That's by law. It's expected that these folks are going to retire in their 50s. As a result of that, we had growth in the unfunded liability because those costs weren't accounted for. So when we look at this next borrowing, we need to think about what are those kinds of risks we're going to encounter. And the way you can make up for those risks, one thing that Troy talked about a few minutes ago is we expect to ask the council, if you approve the borrowing, to allow us to transfer from the original appropriation for the pension system this year, because we'll be giving them a check for $360 million. They're not going to be owed that full $20 million that's in the budget, or the full $30 million that's in the budget. We'd like to transfer some of that money, you know me, you saw me for many, many years, I'd say all of it, put it into this reserve fund so that you've got a composition of about 20% of the value of the borrowing that's sitting in reserve. The reason we like the composition at 20%, or rather 6%, $20 million at 6% is this. When we had that bad experience in 2008, we lost about 30% of the value of the assets at the time. In our valuation in creating these reports, we take gains and losses in the system and spread them out over 5 years so that you don't get these giant spikes, peaks, and valleys. So a 30% loss spread out over 5 years. The recognition of it in any year is 6%. 30% divided by 5 is 6%. My recommendation would be that the council and the mayor look at, additionally, as you go through time and these pension bonds are being paid off, if you end up performing ahead of schedule and you're making gains, to take a portion of those gains every year and add them into that pension reserve fund. Because in time, you're going to have losses. No market goes up forever. Some years they lose money, some years they go up. You want to have as much as you possibly can in reserve. You're already going to be getting ahead of the game because the schedule that Troy talked about going up to $70 million by the time you get out to the early 2030s is going to be less with this borrowing and the bond repayment schedule. That schedule will match in terms of growth, rate, that amortization of the pension that now exists, but it won't be the same, it will be beneath it, so you'll be going up in parallel like that. You're going to have gains, and if you do really well, you have bigger gains. Take some of those gains and put them aside. The other thing you can do is make sure that when you do your valuations, that you're doing a careful examination of what these other risk factors are, you know, and the actuary can speak about that, but Linda knows more about that than I do. You want to make good assumptions as to what's the mortality rate going to be of your members, good assumptions about what are you really going to do in terms of hiring and payroll cost, and there are other elements as well, but I think those are the three biggest risks. So good assumptions take care of two of them. Those are external to the financial transaction. And the other one is being certain that what you're borrowing in terms of interest rate cost is going to be beaten by what you gain when you invest it. And in that last transaction, we didn't hit our bogey, but we've earned over the 16 years since we borrowed that money, we've earned about 7%, closer to 8%. Last few years, we've been well above that, but we had to cover that big drop of 30% in the first couple of years. So financially, we came out ahead of the game. I still think it was a good decision because those bonds aren't paid until 2028. By the time we get to 2028, we'll be much closer to having hit that number. And that market loss was going to occur regardless of whether we borrowed money or not. You know, we don't set the market. That was going to happen anyway. So those are my main comments. Make sure you reserve as much as you can as you go ahead. It's the way to protect against unexpected bad outcomes. And if I'm not the CFO anymore, as you all know, I don't have to write those CFO certification letters, but if I were asked to write it, if I was still on that job, I would recommend this transaction enthusiastically. I think the greater risk really is because the opportunity with these rates is so low. The greater risk is to do nothing, because if you do nothing, you may do better on your investments over time, and that number that we're talking about growing to 70 million may not grow that much, but you may not. But any way you look at it, that's a number you're going to be paying. It'd be good for the city of Brockton to find a way to pay a significant amount less than that. So, thank you. Good to see you all again. A couple of you I don't even know, but good to see you.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much. You remember Mr. Ford from Ward 6, Mr. Condon, so I'm sure he's got a new picture. He's probably already got you on Facebook saying he's back. You know what I mean? Yeah, you gotta watch those Ward 6 people, right, you know? Oh, excuse me, Counselor. Oh, no, you can't, you never can get back at me, no.
You've got the gavel. I'll just
Absolutely, that's
I'll
why
just
the
remind
council
you
president
that
gave it
we
to
are
me.
God's country,
Anyhow,
Mr. Chairman.
you want to go on with the next one, Mr.?
Yes. Thank you,
Clarkson,
Mr.
please.
Chairman, and thank you to Jay for that detailed explanation. So it really demonstrates, I think, the amount of thought that we put into this. So the specific proposal we did email to you, and as I mentioned to you, what's before you now is a placeholder, but the city clerk has that full language and will introduce it formally to you at your next meeting on Monday as an amendment. But we did provide you that language, and it was drafted by our bond counsel. Rick Manley from Loch Lord has worked with the city of Brockton for many, many years and was actually on board when this last transaction was affected in 2005. He's been a critical member of our team, so we've asked him to be here tonight just to speak briefly about the specific language of the pension obligation bond loan order. And of course, as with the rest of our team, will be available at the conclusion of this presentation to answer any questions. So Rick, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Bannon. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Welcome.
Nice to
Thank
be
you for
back
being
again.
here.
I thought I would just, as the person that had drafted the loan order that you'll see, I thought I might just go through the half a dozen sort of major points that are covered there, and then, of course, will be available to speak to any questions that you might have at the conclusion of the presentation. As you can see, as we've discussed earlier, I guess the placeholder doesn't have a dollar amount, but the total for authorization would be $360,900,000. The language of the loan order says that it's intended to fund all or part of the unfunded pension liability and the related costs of getting the transaction done. The borrowing that we're doing is pursuant to a special act of the legislature from 2004, and it sort of constrains an awful lot of what the city would do with the funds. Effectively, as it's set up now, it establishes a maximum amount that can be borrowed, which is a number ultimately to be worked out between the retirement system, PERAC, and also approved by Administration and Finance. So PERAC and the Retirement Board will be working together to confirm what they believe to be the appropriate number for the unfunded amount, and no more than that can be issued. That is something that gets worked out as we get closer to the time when the bonds are actually sold. So what we need to do is if this is a proposal that would be approved, is to set a dollar amount in here as kind of the ceiling, and then within that, and you'll see language here that says that notwithstanding the amount that's initially approved, we can't issue any more than the amount that's allowed to be issued under the special legislation from 2004. There's also the creation of the Stabilization Fund, Mr. Condon alluded to earlier, where funds would be set aside in order to mitigate risk in the event that the assets don't perform as well as folks anticipate. There is also a kind of a stern disclosure portion of the loan order that's required by the guidelines that promulgated by the Administration and Finance folks, just indicating or acknowledging by the council that the issuance of these bonds does pose certain risks, as Jay has spoken to, and as well as our actuary Linda Bourneville will speak after me about that as well. So you'll see that laid out here. Finally, there's a rescission at the end of the order of amounts that were approved in 2004, 2005. There's still a leftover balance on that loan order, technically speaking, and this just makes clear that those amounts will be no longer in force or effect. So that the last term of that financing is cleaned up. And finally, I think it's important to know that once the transaction is approved, or if it is to be approved by this council, there will be a substantial amount of work undertaken with the folks in Administration of Finance with a full-scale sort of plan of finance that's presented to the governor's office staff, and no bonds can be issued until that approval is obtained from the Secretary of Administration. So in a nutshell, anyway, those are sort of the highlights of the terms of the loan order, and I'd be very happy to speak to any questions you might have as we move along.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Mr. Clarkson?
Thank you very much, Rick. And before I introduce our final presenter, I would like to recognize some other members of our team who are not presenting tonight but have been an integral part of our deliberations every week. Of course, our treasurer-collector, Marty Brophy, has been an important part of that team and is a linchpin in this process. And should we move forward, Marty and the mayor will be the ones that will actually issue that debt, and so he's been an important part of our team. Abby Jeffers, who works with Cinder from Hilltop Securities, has been an important member of our team. And although the school CFO doesn't have any formal role in this, your school chief financial officer, Aldo Petronio, was the city auditor for the last time. And so much like we wanted to just draw on the history and expertise of Jay Condon, Aldo has graciously agreed to give of his time and has been on our calls every week, just so we rounded out the circle with as many experts as possible. And it's been really critical to having a thoughtful and complete process, to having those other minds at the table. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that the retirement board has been an excellent partner in this and is very helpful, and they have offered the expertise of their actuary, and Linda Borneval from KMS Actuaries has been at our meetings since the very early stages and has, and again, working closely with our team, been an important partner in projecting different scenarios and really examining the risk so that we made sure we were going into this process with eyes wide open. So as our final presentation, before we seek your questions, I'll ask Linda to come up and just talk about how we came up with some of the figures that we're using and what process went into that. Linda, thank you for being here.
Good evening.
Good evening. How are you? Welcome to
I'm
City
great.
Hall.
How are you?
Pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Okay, so a little bit of history here. You probably may recall back in 2005 when the first POB, pension obligation bond, was issued, Chapter 32 of the statutes actually required full funding of all pension liabilities by 2028. There's no, it's no coincidence that the bond was structured that way back then. 2008 happened, however, and many of the retirement systems in Massachusetts were really strapped for trying to follow that same funding schedule that was going to be due in 2028. So the legislatures did change Chapter 32 back in 2009-10, so that now all full funding of the systems must be done by 2040. So with that, we are hired by the retirement board every other year to perform a funding valuation. We analyze the member data, the assets, and other assumptions, and we come up with a liability of the system and compare that to the assets that are set aside at that point in time. Full funding, I always say, is something that lasts for one day, because the next day you might be in a surplus position, and the day after you may be, unfunded again. So pension funding is a little bit tricky. You're trying to establish a snapshot of what that unfunded liability is. So we've done that under a number of scenarios for the pension, the POB group. So the retirement board currently has a funding schedule in place that is to be fully paid off by 2032. That's at an investment return rate of 7 3/4, which in today's standards is a little bit high. We will be reassessing that in the next valuation cycle coming up in 2022. But for our analysis for the POB, we really want to look at a very conservative rate of return. So with that, we lowered our investment return assumption to 6 3/4, and that's how we get the $361, and odd dollars unfunded liability. We are looking at that accrued liability on that day. We're offsetting it by the assets, but that accrued liability is going to be, all those projected payments are going to be discounted at the 6.75 rate of return. So what are we talking about? We're talking about an opportunity that you have your pension obligation bond able to be borrowed at a pretty low return of 2.5, and now we're comparing it to that 6.75 liability assumption. There are a lot of assumptions, as Mr. Condon mentioned, that we actually analyze every year, that we do evaluation. After the investment return rate, probably the most important assumption that we make is for those mortality rates, how long we expect people to stay alive and collect their pension. So that has definitely changed since the last POB issuance. Things like mortality improvement of all generations is definitely something that is studied pretty much always. So there's been a lot of change to these liabilities over the years that are recognizing longer longevity. When you're last to speak, most people take most of the comments that you're going to make. So with that, I am closing out, I guess, the final part of the presentation, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Well, I think at this time, Mr. Clarkson, we'll start to get into questions, and I'm sure councilors have several questions. I don't think we really should be buried into a lot of questions. I think you realize the situation that you have here before us as a city council, and as our job and duty to make sure that our pension plan and plans for all of our retirees are in right place. I don't think that this is, and maybe I'm wrong, and Mr. Clarkson can correct me, but I don't think it's something we can really walk away from, councilors. It's something that we've known we've had to deal with over the last several years, so it would not be in our best interest, and I'm sure nor the mayor if we do not, show a strong support to this. So that's what I say. I mean, questions are great, but I look at it as how much more can I take in from what I've listened to the fact that everybody that draws a pension deserves to be treated and move forward with what we have to do to make sure that people are having pensions until the day, I guess till the day I go into Pine Hill Cemetery. That's what I would say, and some people would say as well. But that's what pensions are about. A lot of people don't like to hear that, but it is. That's why we worked all our lives to get something. So, Councilor Thompson, I see your hand up first, so go right ahead.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Troy, if you don't mind. So, just first question, if this is the A team, that makes you Mr. T, or no? Wow, that went over not well. So, I think I get the gist, and again, with this audio system, it's a little difficulty kind of hearing everything. But from my understanding, we're going to make a borrowing of $360 million. We take that, we put it into the market so when we borrow it, we're expecting a 2.5% rate on our borrowing. We take the money, we put it in the market with the hopeful expectation of the 6.75 return. We then pay back our obligation for the borrowing, and then also pay into the pension system. Is it with that 6.75 that we're making both payments?
So the reality is just a little different than you've described. So when we borrow that money, we will actually walk it in a Brinks truck probably down the street to the Brockton Retirement Board.
Okay.
And we will pay them the money because the pension obligation for the city is owed to the Brockton Retirement Board.
Okay.
So the investment will then occur by the Retirement Board.
Okay.
But the projection is indeed correct at that 6.75. And so our obligation on an annual basis will shift from paying that payment to the Retirement Board to then paying the debt on that money we borrowed. The key is that in that original PowerPoint that we provided to you that showed that escalating payment, that we believe, given the assumptions that we're making, that the annual payment on the debt will be less than that escalating payment that we would have otherwise had to have made to the retirement board. Hence, probably the most important thing you heard tonight, with all due respect to my colleagues and of course the mayor, is the statement by Jay Condon that the greatest risk is doing nothing. Because if we do nothing, that escalating payment remains, and it's not it's not an optional liability for the city. We have to pay that. It's our legal obligation to the retirement board. So hence, our plan was hatched to see how we could reduce that escalation of the payment, and having, what Cinder called the smoothing of a payback on a bond was financially, I think, a much better way to go about addressing that liability.
And that's due to the investment, the return on investment that would be receiving from the borrowing.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Secondly, so kind of like we were dealing with the public safety complex, it's a little easier to kind of wrap your mind around, we're borrowing this money for this project, over a certain period of time it's paid off, now we have this project. So what are we, this takes us to 2040, or like this borrowing, how far down the road does this get us, or I'm a little confused about that part.
So right now, as I think Linda mentioned, the law says this has to be addressed by 2040. This plan in place right now will have the bond paid off in 2036. So we'll still be ahead of schedule as required by the Commonwealth. And Linda's also correct. I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but it is a bit of a moving target, right? Because the 360 is an estimate, and the market will fluctuate and will hire, and people are living longer than they used to, which is great news for humanity. Not such great news for the retirement board. Right. So the exact amount is always changing, but we agree as a group that this estimate is a very sound estimate for what our overall liability will look like.
All right, so there's flexibility as to how far out in our obligation to the pension board this borrowing will take us. At that point, we do this again, or because we'll have a further obligation beyond that, or that's a little confusing.
So the whole concept of being fully funded is to eliminate the need to continue to do this. That doesn't mean there'll never be additional obligation. It'll depend on what Jay talked about. And by the way, I'm referencing these other people because it just shows how much everyone brought to the table. But it will depend on what the hiring practices of the city are over the next 15 years and what the contracts look like. So there may be some residual liability moving forward. It's frankly very difficult to calculate, certainly not on the fly tonight, but I can stand here and tell you with confidence that this addresses the bulk of our liability, and I wouldn't anticipate that a future CFO in 15 years would be here asking you to issue additional pension obligation debt.
Because we're going to have, we'll have future pension obligation, though. So this borrowing is going to take us to and cover those obligations for the foreseeable future.
Correct. Jay, if you want to briefly respond to that.
Just simply, you forever, as long as the pension system exists, you're going to owe what's called the normal cost, because people are going to work and be hired and who aren't even in this calculation today. That will always exist. If the plan goes according to plan, you won't have an unfunded liability by 2036. It will be gone, assuming all the assumptions were met or exceeded. If they're exceeded, you could be done before 2036. You just have the bond payments to pay, but the amortization costs will have totally gone away and you've just got normal cost. It's quite possible that you won't make those numbers, and one reason to pick 2036 instead of 2040 is it gives you a possibility, if you've got a new unfunded liability emerge, to pay that through 2040 as opposed to having it come due in one lump sum.
Okay, I think I better understand now. You're saying that this borrowing is to cover the unfunded liabilities that we're required to fund by 2040. Okay, so not any future pension obligation, just the unfunded liability that by law we're required to fund. Okay. All right. Much better understanding. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
Councilor Nacastro.
So, Mr. Clarkson, we already, on item number 5, approved a $19 million bond. And now there's this, and we've had others, public safety complex and stuff. Can we afford all of this? And I'm interested to see almost a list, a laundry list of our debt service.
The simple answer to that question, Counselor, is yes. And we can certainly provide you. In fact, in your budget book, there is an actual list of all of the outstanding debt. And the 19 million is completely paid for by the water user fee that you instituted. The public safety complex, if you remember, and I know this isn't helpful to hold this up, but I'll resend that. This is in that PowerPoint presentation. The public safety complex takes advantage of retiring debt in 2028, which is the old pension obligation debt. And so our annual payments go from some $16 million a year down to $2 million a year. So our annual debt payments are decreasing a few years from now by some $14 million a year. And so we're confident, not just confident, we know, I can tell you with certainty that the payment for that $98 million is within that window of opportunity that we have. And as I stated to you back then, we can take on additional debt and not increase the strain on our budget. So all of this is happening at the same time, and it seems overwhelming, but we've taken great pains to make sure, and the mayor has set an unwavering policy that it be fiscally responsible and not increase the burden on our taxpayers. So I can tell you, yes, we can afford it, and with certainty that, yes, it's fiscally responsible, the pension obligation debt, because the money to pay the retirement board is currently in our operating budget. So once we address the unfunded liability portion of that, that's at least $20 million in this year's budget that will be available to pay principal and interest on the pension obligation debt. So for all of those different borrowings that we've undertaken, we've identified definitive funding sources so that they don't increase the burden on our taxpayers.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor.
Motion for favorable recommendation.
Just before we do that, I just want to take the opportunity, I don't know if the mayor, if you want to, any other final words you have before we take any vote?
No, I just again, want to thank everybody. And I think what Councilor Nacastro just said, I mean, all of us, I mean, we're looking at huge numbers, right? Huge numbers. But as a councilor or a mayor, we have to rely on the experts. And to spend a half a year every week with these folks, I feel really confident that we're doing the best interest of the taxpayer, the people that elect us, and quite honestly, for the future of the city of Champions. So thank you again, Mr. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Motion was made. Who made the motion? Councilor Monahan, second by Councilor Azak. Is everybody all set with that? Everybody in favor? Hands? Opposed? Goes back to the city council with a full favorable recommendation. And I want to thank all of you for being participants here this evening, Mr. Mayor and all others that have been working on this very much. And we truly appreciate your support and what you're doing. And again, it's always a nice pleasure to see Mr. Condon roam in the corridors here. So I know we're under control. Aren't we, Mr. President?
I hope so.
I hope so. Thank you. Thank you. It's all yours.
Thank you, Councilor Ianieri. Councilors, I do apologize for the sound issue. It still isn't right, and we will get it right. I've been sitting out there listening from several different angles. Madam Clerk, item number 7, please.
Ordered that the City Council reviews an exemption from the residency requirement in accordance with the revised ordinances of the City of Brockton, Article 3, Section 2-110, City of Brockton Ordinance Waiver of Residency Extension in reference to Anne Marie Raymond. Invited Anne Marie Raymond, Interim City Auditor.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Again, I want to thank you for letting me speak. I'm not an invited guest. Everybody knows Anne Marie. Anne Marie has served the city for over 13 and a half years. She's served in many capacities. Most recently, she's been the acting auditor. She's stellar. She's been the clerk of the FinCom. She's just a great person, but by all means, when life comes in the way and things change in your life, right, you should honor and respect a dedicated employee for the city of Brockton. So Anne Marie, to her credit, came to talk to me, and I told her without hesitation I would put a waiver forward before, because again, 13 and a half years she's been here, and now life makes it a changing situation where she looks to move on. Still work here, still be dedicated, still, be the biggest cheerleader here at City Hall, but just not be a resident of the city of Brockton. And again, I'm hoping and humbly asking that you would support her, and I know she's here tonight to answer any questions. Thank you.
Move to recommend favorably.
Second.
There's been a motion made and seconded to recommend favorably. Any discussion? All right, if not, all in favor of recommending favorably? Oh, I'm sorry. Did someone want recognition?
No, I mean, I was willing to, since I sponsored this, I had a prepared statement, but if we want to go right into a vote, that's fine.
All right, all those in favor?
We did it. Yeah.
All those opposed? It is a vote.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Mayor. Thank you, everyone. Councilors, any special recognition? Councilor Azak.
Yes, I would like councilors' recognition. Thank you. So I have a few announcements this evening. First of all, I received an update from our superintendent of parks, Mr. Tim Carpenter, after the incident a few months ago with the tragedy, the loss of life of the two young children at DW Fields Park. We just wanted to inform everybody that signage has been installed at all the ponds at DW in multiple languages, so everybody's aware of them. They're in plain view. I've seen them, so they have been taken care of, and signage is up at DW. I know that was a big request that was brought by residents after that incident. I would also like to announce that Brockton's Summer Celebration is Saturday, July 31st. It celebrates the community spirit of Brockton. It's from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Salisbury Park, which is located on Crescent Street, right behind the Plouffe School. So there'll be entertainment, live music, some history, children's activity. So I hope everybody will come out and join in the fun activities. If you need more information, please visit their Facebook page at 2021 Summerfest Brockton Midsummer Celebration, and you'll be able to find a lot of that information there. And another piece of information is, a while back, I sponsored a resolve, and we had, Pastor Reed and Mr. Bill Hogan here, and there's a Brockton Tourism and Cultural Group that has been meeting regularly, and Pastor Reed has created a website for the city of Brockton, which was, many residents have asked us, why can't we have somewhere to go to find out what events are happening in the city. So Pastor Reed has done that, so I thank him personally. And that website is www.happeninginbrockton.com. So you can go onto the website, find out what's happening in Brockton, and if you have an event that you would like on the website, please email Pastor Reed at rdrconsult@gmail.com, and he will post it on there for you. So thank you again. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councilors, very quickly, some months ago, possibly last year, we had a proposal for an apartment complex on North Pearl Street, and that project did not go forward. It was not well received. Following that, I had a group of Ward 1 residents who asked me to please keep them informed as to what might happen with that property, and I did follow through with that, and I was contacted by a major Boston hospital that wants to do something with that property. So even though it's a Ward 1 meeting, fulfilling a promise to the residents in that area, everyone is invited to the Hancock School at 6:30 on Wednesday, the 21st. There will be 4 presenters there to provide residents with information, and then following that, at some point, they will be coming here to the council, if not in August, in early September, so that you will have a presentation. But it was important to answer the wishes of the constituents first. So please come by, listen, learn, see what's going on there. It does border Ward 7 and Ward 3, so all invited. If there's no further business, meeting adjourned.